on the surface, choosing a whiskey of the year involves taking a look back at all the different bottles that we've had, the different drams that we've tried, and choosing our favorite, and at least for YouTube content creators, then making a video about it. The motivation behind doing that may be as simple as creating what will be one of, if not their most popular video of the year, or it could go a little bit deeper than that, which it certainly is for me. Choosing a whiskey of the year is more about a reflection on the last 12 months, not just about the whiskey that I drank. There's always going to be whiskey in the world. There's going to be more whiskey than I could ever possibly try. And at the end of the day, whatever bottle I choose, or however I decide to categorize them, or how many different videos I release breaking down my favorite bottles of the year, I still didn't try them all. It still doesn't mean a whole lot at the end of the day, but it still felt really good to look back on this past year and think about not only the whiskey I've drank, but the places I've been and the people that I shared those moments with. So over the course of this video, I'm going to take a little bit of a retrospective about the bottles that I drank this year. Not all of them, obviously, but most of the ones that I'm at least going to mention will be things that I actually posted a video review of. There will be some that I have not. There'll be some that I will maybe in the future, and some probably that may never make it onto an actual video. However, internally, as I talk about these bottles, I know that there's a story behind each and every one of them that would be very difficult to convey, not only in a brief manner, but in a way that would connect with anyone. The personal growth that I went through this year, just as far as making a YouTube channel goes, and challenging myself to drink new whiskeys, trying to challenge maybe some of the biases that I had, and really changing a lot of habits when it comes to my whiskey purchasing and consumption. But in conclusion, just know that every bottle that appears up here has a place in my heart, just because it was actually literally a part of my life. And particularly with the YouTube channel, I had to sit there and I had to think really closely, and I spent some personal time with these inanimate objects full of delicious, delicious amber whiskey. And hey, that is what it is. That's, I guess, the life of a whiskey geek. And some of the best bottles, I think that's why we probably get emotional over them at times, is just because we do spend a lot of moments of quiet contemplation, good times, bad times, with a glass of whiskey. So without further ado, let's actually talk about some bottles. So let's get one thing out of the way. In front of me, you'll see a number of Springbanks, Kilkerran. Before we really get into the proceedings, let's talk about Springbank a little bit, and Glengyle as a bit of a proxy there. Last year, I named the Kilkerran 16, the one with the kind of the light blue lettering on it. I believe there's a splash of rum in here, as my whiskey of the year for 2023. Absolutely fantastic bottle. No regrets. It probably was one of my favorite bottles of 2023, without a shadow of a doubt. I have reviewed these other 4 bottles on the channel, although the Springbank 10 and the Kilkerran 12, these are actually different bottles, as I finished the 2 that I reviewed earlier this year. The 18-year-olds were part of that series that I did basically over the course of the spring. And the reason I want to just kind of mention these is I'm not going to name a Campbelltown whiskey, or at least a J&A Mitchell whiskey, as my whiskey of the year for 2024. The reality is, when we're talking Springbank and Glengyle or Kilkerran, there's probably a strong contender for whiskey of the year in there somewhere every single time. Not that I buy every single bottle, not that I even am able to get around to opening the ones that I do manage to pick up, just because there's just so much good whiskey out there. But it doesn't make much sense for me to really name a Springbank or a Long Row or a Kilkerran even whiskey of the year. The 16, I think, maybe a little bit of an exception. The Kilkerran 12 probably is something that is available enough where most people, if you really want one and you keep your eye out for them, you can buy them. They do tend to hang around on the web, at least, and they're not impossible to get. So Kilkerran, yes, something I would probably still be willing to name a whiskey of the year at some point in the future, but I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to particularly Springbank in terms of like a lifetime achievement award sort of thing. Some people get even mad when you post a review of Springbank. I don't know, they're still holding on to some dream that maybe it will suddenly just appear on all the shelves across the world if we kind of stop pretending like it exists. Next, I briefly wanted to talk about independent bottlings. These are always difficult. They're hard to even do reviews on, and I started this channel with the intention of doing a lot of reviews of independent bottles. And I still intend on doing that. I still have done that as recently as, I think this Craig Ellicky from the Thompson Brothers was the most recent review that I did, at least at the time of recording this. And it's a category of whiskey that I've drank less of this year than maybe at any other point in my whiskey journey. In fact, beyond these 4 independent bottlings, and yes, this is not technically an independent bottling, it is a single cask with the Loch Lomond branding. It is a store exclusive. This was from Binny's in Chicago. But outside of these 4, there really were probably only a few other independent bottlings that I even opened and drank this year. We'll talk about one more later. But this is really kind of the extent. These are probably the top 4 bottles, and none of these, well, this was bottled, I think, in 2023. The rest were kind of like 2021, 2022. So you can even argue as to whether they would qualify. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to put any of these in like the serious contention for running. This Hart Brothers, for example, was one of the more surprising bottles of the year. I'm not that far into it, really only a couple pours of it. It's heavily sherried. This is 12 years old, 58.2%. It was on the clearance. It was on clearance, or it was bundled in like a package from K&L. There was, I think, 2 or 3 bottles of these. I think they were bundled as one. Maybe you could buy them individually. I don't remember, but they were heavily discounted. And these kind of sat around for the last year or so. As I mentioned, just kind of waiting for me to get around to actually opening them. And me kind of assuming that I might not particularly like them, but I do try to keep some of these real heavily sherried or heavily cask influenced bottles around. And at least the first couple pours of this have completely blew me away. It may end up being one of the better deals that I've bought recently. However, if one was going to be my favorite, you can check out the review of the Craig Ellicky 13 from last week. But this Loch Lomond 11 pretty much changed my viewpoint of Loch Lomond and has sent me down a little bit of a rabbit hole with them and taught me some few things, opened up my palate to some other types of sensations and flavors in terms of like really learning what people meant when they said fizzy or effervescent. This is the epitome of that, and it's something that finally clicked in my brain when I finally got to try this cask strength Loch Lomond. So I can't put any of these forward as my whiskey of the year. So we'll be talking about one more independent bottling that probably came pretty close. It's not going to win either, but you may know which one it's going to be. But yeah, independent bottlings definitely took a backseat this year to my exploration of some of the official range that I had been ignoring for the last several years of my journey, kind of as I've talked about before on this channel. But so I won't drone on too much more about that. But independent bottling still some fantastic values, and still a source of a lot of fun, interesting, and high quality whiskey. All right, let's talk about introductory type of whiskey. These tend to be those 10, 12-year-old offerings that introduce us to a brand. Now, sometimes these distilleries have even lower ABV options or some more affordable non-age statement options, that sort of thing that maybe you could view as the true introductions. But I think for most people here, this is kind of where the real kind of rubber meets the road when it comes to high quality whiskey from the official bottling ranges of Scottish distilleries. So I reviewed quite a few of these type of bottles this year, and I gave out a whole lot of 7 out of 10s. Very good. A few 6 out of 10s, which is above average. And there was a couple lower scored bottles, but we won't talk about those today. But there was one that really stood out for me, and that was the Bunnahabhain 12, which was one of the first reviews that I posted on this channel. It's one of my highest viewed videos on the channel. Maybe a little bit because it's big letters, underrated, overrated, which alludes to a statement I had made in one of the podcast episodes where, kind of from last January, I guess they would have went live, where I thought that Bunnahabhain 12 was a little overhyped. It was good whiskey, but man, I kind of wished everybody would shut up about it, sort of thing. And I said, well, you know what? It's been a little while since I've actually had a bottle. Let me actually grab one and see what I actually think, since it had been probably a year or two since I had owned a bottle. And yeah, this was a eye-opener. I definitely had to eat those words of calling it overrated. Seems like maybe it's kind of lost a little bit of run. I don't know. Maybe everyone, saw my video, which they didn't. Well, I think only a couple hundred people saw it, but maybe word got out that everyone should shut up about it. Because I kind of feels like I've seen a little bit less talk about it. It didn't get nominated for the best value whiskey this year in the Oswas, although its cask strength brother won the Scotch whiskey of the year. So there you go. It's still it's still talked about, just the cask strength version, and it's getting even more run, more hype with the big award, at least if you watch the Oswas. All right, let's take a second to talk about the super high end. These are kind of crazy bottles. These were both, well, if you wanted to buy these today, they would be extremely expensive. This Craig Ellicky 23, I just reviewed this a couple weeks ago, and absolutely fantastic, absolutely wonderful. This was probably from 2019-ish or so. I'm still not sure exactly when this particular one was bottled, but I think it can be as early as 2014, but I think it was like 2019. I bought it 2021 or something like that. Anyways, so this wouldn't really be in the running anyways. They just released a new version of the Craig Ellicky 23 this past year, and it's going to run you almost $500, or maybe more than $500 once you add tax. So it's extremely high end. It's always been a little bit expensive, but it's kind of gone through the roof. And here is the other independent bottling that I mentioned. This is the 21-year-old Macallan from the Spey Malt line from Gordon MacPhail. And I just wanted to make sure that I talked about this bottle. I haven't drank a ton of it since I did the review. I'm still kind of barely into it. And so we'll see kind of how the bottle ends up opening up over time. But I think this is definitely on the short list of, at least in terms of bottles that I've owned personally and that I've opened this year, and that were at least considerable, or being able to be considered for whiskey of the year. This was almost certainly the best bottle I've opened and owned this year. That's saying a lot. We'll see kind of how I feel about it once I get through the entire bottle. But this was also $500. It's a one of 327 bottles. Not really something I can put forward as the whiskey of the year. Not saying it's the absolute best whiskey that I've tasted this year, but it's pretty close. So from all the bottles that we've discussed so far, we really have the Bunnahabhain 12 as a real contender for whiskey of the year. And that's about to change, because pretty much every bottle that I'm going to talk about from here on out, I would be perfectly happy, perfectly fine naming my whiskey of the year. So we're really going to kind of get into the meat of things now. And these are all excellent examples of that. These are all from my 18-year-old review series that I did basically over the spring, where I basically got almost as many of the 18-year-old single malt scotches that are official bottlings that I could reasonably find and obviously afford. Some of them I had accumulated over some time, and others I picked up at least fairly recently or around the time of that series. And there were some fantastic whiskeys, and it really kind of changed a bit of my personal viewpoint on kind of more expensive official bottlings. It was really, I was really kind of in the camp of, if I'm going to be spending $150 around there or more, why not get an independent bottling, or get in a good cask strength official special release or something like that. And the reality is that that was probably a little short-sighted of me, because some of my favorite whiskeys of the year were found during that period. These five were probably the standouts from that series, but there were others as well. These were the ones that just really kind of struck a chord with me. The Altmore 18, again, this is a bottle from a few years ago. I really just probably started drinking, I probably opened this bottle at the end of 2023, I think, and I kind of got to know it. And it was maybe, in a certain sense, one of the main impetuses for, whatever, for me doing that kind of roundup. This one really isn't going to be eligible. It's extremely hard to find. I think you can still get it directly from Dewar's, but I don't think, if you're in the States, I think you're kind of SOL. If you find one of these, or the 12-year-old, or even the 21, if you're willing to pay for it, I would say grab it. They can be pretty expensive. I probably wouldn't expect to find this 18 for less than $200, and depending on where you find it, maybe quite a bit more. But so I wanted to put this up here, just kind of a recognition for a bottle that completely surprised me, that I wasn't really sure what to expect, and absolutely love this bottle. Wish I could pick up more of these on the shelf. I would probably even be willing to pay close to $200 for one. If things start going above that, I would probably have to think hard about it, but yeah, I might buy one more. All right, 4 real contenders, at least from this batch of whiskey. And again, we have 2 from our friends over at Distell, who also had the Bunnahabhain 18, which I also reviewed. Thought that was a really good whiskey, but especially with all the weird pricing and stuff here in the States, I didn't like it enough. I didn't like it more than the 12 enough to kind of justify it. It was very good. Maybe a little too heavily sherried for my personal palate, but still very good. But I'm happy to say that these 2 bottles have made appearances here in the States. The Deanston at $150, and unfortunately the Lechick 18 is $180. Obviously, that is plus tax. So the cheapest bottle is the Deanston, followed by not all that much the much kind of discussed Bruichladdich 18-year-old, which is about $170, $175 generally, at least. I think I can pick them up at Total Wine for that price. So, as I mentioned, any of these could be my whiskey of the year. I think it's kind of almost a rite of passage for YouTubers to probably name one of these 2 bottles, the Deanston or the Lechick 18, as their whiskey of the year at some point. I really debated. I could pick any of these. I think probably the Deanston is maybe a little more kind of all around just high quality good, where the other 3 have something a little bit more. So maybe the Deanston 18 was, again, something I'd be happy to name whiskey of the year, but overall probably didn't quite stand up to like the wow moments that some of these other bottles provided me. So, oh, and by the way, I did give this one an 8 out of 10, and I said I think it could be a 9 by the time we're done, and I think we're there. It's definitely better than it was when I reviewed this back kind of in the first quarter of the year, I think. It's turned out to be absolutely fantastic. I know not everybody loved it. I did, so I feel bad. Obviously, especially if you bought it based on my recommendation and you didn't like it. Obviously, you never want that to happen. But I can only give you my honest and personal opinion. In terms of what would come out of these, again, I really heavily debated which one it was going to be. The Lechick 18, if you can get it like at the UK pricing, I think it makes me feel a lot better. It became a little more complicated when it was $180, because the one thing about these 2 bottles was kind of the price. And it kind of pissed a lot of people off with, I know the Port Charlotte being like over $200 for most people, I believe. So I did make up my mind. I'm still debating, like still in my mind, I'm like, do I really want this? But I do think that just in terms of just a special bottle, um, the Port Charlotte 18, even though this was the most expensive bottle, and a lot of people were unhappy with the pricing on this, this was pretty universally loved by the I don't think I saw a bad review of it. I'm sure someone out there did not like it. It does have some challenging notes. It's very bruichladdie. It's very kind of lactic and cheesy. It's got some complex notes to it. So if I was going to recommend a bottle, it would probably be the Lechic 18. This is probably the safest bet, and well, the Deanston 18 as well. But if you like peat, I mean, the Lechic 18, I can see why people have named it their whiskey of the year time and time again. And I hesitate because this 18 was a special release. I think they're probably going to release this as they have it. It might be different casts every time. So it's a little bit difficult when you have some more standard bottles, but you'll come to find out that this is going to end up being a little bit of a trend. So I am going to elevate the Port Charlotte 18 as kind of the best of the best, although the Lechic and the bruichladdie got really close. So these are the last three that I'm going to talk about. And as you can see, this was a bit of the year of peat for me. If there's one thing that I can take away, if it wasn't the year of official standard releases, peat made a big comeback for me, as it was probably a category that I felt I had ignored. Not that I didn't like them, I just don't know. My brain just always looked past them on my shelf. Not always, but once diving into some of the new offerings, some of the much hyped bottles of the year, or the past couple years, I really found out that, yeah, I still do really love some heavily peated whiskey. So we have the Leg Corey Cravey here. This is what, 55% ABV from the new distillery from the Isle of Arran, owned by the same people who own Loch Ranza, who released the Isle of Arran line of whiskey, the Arran 10 being many people's absolute go-to daily pour and a frequent winner of Whiskey of the Year awards in its own right. And coming from a brand new distillery, a young distillery, this absolutely took me, I won't say took me by surprise. I had heard good things, but I had heard good things about other really young whiskey that I had eagerly bought a bottle and then just found out that it really didn't suit my palate very well. This was a completely different experience. Once I got to try this in a blind tasting from none other than Kevin, no surprise there, I knew that I really needed to get a bottle, and they did come over to the States, so I was able to get this from K&L without having it shipped. It was still very expensive. I think it was $100 bottle. It was $90 or $100, one of the two, which for a 4 or 5-year-old whiskey is pushing it, but I get it. It's shipped over here. There's probably a premium on it. It's a new product. It's a higher ABV. It's a new distillery that's trying to get its money back and pay probably some of its debts. All that stuff. At any rate, absolutely fantastic. Another one of my very popular videos of this year was the new Lefroy Carchus. I waxed very poetic about this in that bottle. I gave it a 9 out of 10. Had some very nice things to say about it, just from not just the whiskey in the bottle, but really what it represented. And then I finally picked up a bottle of the Seneg, and this bottle it definitely met all of the hype. Kilchoman had been getting some really great attention lately from the online community, at least. And so much so that they decided to release a cast strength version of it, which I have. I think they actually tried to deliver it today. Apparently they came a little too early in the morning. I think we were still sleeping at Saturday. So, hey, hopefully I should have a bottle at least here and available to start tasting soon. Probably won't see a review until after the first of the year, just because with the holidays and everything, I don't think I'm going to have a chance to get to that or some of the other things that are in the box with it, which I think you'll all be very interested in as well. But this Seneg just absolutely, in terms of like buying a bottle based on pure just hype, particularly with an official bottling like this, and it meeting those expectations, man, I cannot knock it for that at all. It's absolutely delicious. But from these three, and kind of my last nomination, in terms of whiskeys that really made me feel like confident that I could put these forward as a true whiskey of the year contender, it's going to be this Lefroy Carchus. Again, you have to watch the review. I don't want to get into it too much, but just the absolute epitome, and not just this bottle, but this is really just kind of a nod to the Carchus line and their willingness to do different things. And even though maybe some people don't like every single version, they do something different every year. They've kept it pretty affordable. It was a little unfortunate to see this kind of creep over the $100 mark, but given how close even the non-age statements ones were, this wasn't surprising. But there aren't too many higher ABV. It's not cask strength, but there's not too many of those that we can get in the States for less than $100 these days anyways. So their willingness to do different things and for every bottle, every release to actually be interesting, unlike some of their other Isla brethren, which release things that are just a little bit different every year and charge twice as much. Anyway, Lefroy Carchus, the 10-year-old, this was a fantastic bottle, and I'm looking forward to talking about it a little bit more when I come back. All right, so real quick, there are obviously a number of bottles that have been released in the UK, particularly in the last couple months, that I've seen a lot of YouTubers talking about and really enjoying. And unfortunately, they weren't released in the States yet. Some of them I think will be, maybe all of them will be, at least the ones I'm thinking of. But I did end up ordering a number of those, as I mentioned, like the Kilchoman Sine cask strength, and a few other bottles that probably would have at least competed for Whiskey of the Year this year. But they're going to have to wait. They're going to have to get entered into next year's because, again, I would have just gotten them as early as today. And unfortunately, I wouldn't have gotten to know them well enough to consider them. So if you don't see one of those bottles that was released in the last couple months, that's why we don't get everything in time. So, yeah, let's talk about these though. So I really didn't intend for it to go this way, I guess. Maybe subconsciously I was doing it, but we kind of ended up with kind of an introductory, more affordable bottle in terms of the Bunnahabhain 12. We kind of had a bit of a mid-range, higher ABV special release, and then we had kind of a pretty expensive, another special release, a very anticipated bottle that had to live up to a lot of hype upon its release, being the first 18-year-old Port Charlotte that we've gotten to try, at least officially. And so we kind of got a bit of a gamut here, which is great. We got 2 peated whiskeys. We've got all 3 are from Islay, which was surprising. Again, I as I mentioned, I certainly enjoyed my Islay whiskeys. I certainly enjoyed my peaty whiskeys, but I just didn't think of them that way. I guess they were in the friend zone, I suppose. But here we are, 3 Islay whiskeys that ended up getting nominated for Whiskey of the Year, all official bottlings. And this is really close. As I mentioned, every bottle I've really talked about outside of maybe those first couple batches there, were more than deserving. But this is kind of how I whittled it down, and I'm happy that I got to explore a region that is much beloved around the world, that I thought that I knew, and really kind of come away with some important lessons overall. But once I got it down to these 3, it was actually a pretty easy choice for me. Not because the whiskey is necessarily particularly better than the other ones or not, but just, again, the Lefroy Carchus just represents something that I think has been missing in the Scotch whiskey industry. And it's coming from me, like, I don't have access to everything or immediate access to everything. I'm sure there's a lot of other distillery exclusives and things that come out, but they have done a pretty good job, as I said, of releasing something fairly affordable, always high quality, and something that's different with every single edition, something that's noticeably different than last year's. And I know that next year's, which I believe is actually a cast strength lore, which I don't know if they've revealed the price on that yet. I am slightly concerned because the lore is really expensive here anyways. It's I have a bottle of it that I've almost been afraid to open because the prices keep going up and up and up, and I've had some Lefroy's open, so but I think it's like $150 bottle now, at least. Maybe you can get it cheaper in your area, but I'm not sure what that one's going to go for. I'll be pretty disappointed if that ends up being $250 when it hits the store, or maybe even more. If that's the case and they don't give us something that is comparable to what we've been getting over the last few years, I'll probably have some pretty harsh words for them, but at least for the time being, the Lefroy Cartridge 10-year-old, the cask favorites, 9 out of 10 in the review, and it really just deserves it, I think. And I don't think that this lineup, that the Cartridge gets enough attention. It kind of gets swept under the rug, and for all the complaining that happens with the Ardbeg releases, these sit on the shelves, and even the really good ones tend to maybe not get talked about that much, although I did see a lot of love for this particular release. So Lefroy Cartridge, the 10-year-old, the Cask Favorites edition for 2024 is my whiskey of the year. I really do appreciate everyone coming along with me on this journey. This may not have been the best whiskey I drank this year. That's not what this was about. This is a little bit more about the spirit of Scotch whiskey and just doing something that is for the fans and at an affordable price and at a high quality, and at the very least will spark positive conversation, even if maybe any particular edition of this isn't your personal favorite. But this one is probably mine up to this point, and I hope that cast strength lore it isn't too pricey. I'm willing to pay a fair price, but I'm worried. Anyway, thank you again for watching Whiskey Uncorked. I really do appreciate it. I should have another video up before Christmas, but if not, happy holidays, happy new year, all that fun stuff. Thank you again for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. Cheers.